Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session where we're going to be talking about strategies you can employ to protect your business against cyber attacks and to manage your digital risk. I'm Mark Lee. I'm the Managing Director of Nasstar's Managed IT Services Business Unit, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by Jeremy Hendy, who is the CEO of Skurio, one of the technology partners whose amazing technology we use to help us to secure and protect our customers' IT estates. Well, to start with, and please excuse this slightly tired quote, but I think it's as relevant today as it's ever been. Robert Mueller, who is much more famous now than he perhaps was when he made this statement, you'll know him from the very public fallouts the now former US president had with him over the last couple of years. But if anyone thought his statement back then was an exaggeration or overstating the risks, then I don't think there's any doubt now, 8 or 9 years later, that he was absolutely right. In fact, the only thing that's changed, perhaps, is the number of companies yet to be on the end of their first cyber attack, which is probably even smaller now than it was back in 2012. And that's because cybercrime has just grown exponentially over the last several years, actually, and through 2020, that trend continued if it didn't accelerate. And the threats and the risks posed by cyber criminals to all of us in our personal and business lives are very real. And the pretty much wholesale shift that happened last year to home working, almost overnight, has actually turned up the volume of that risk even louder by increasing the attack surface for the criminals that are out there. If you think about it pre-pandemic, it's likely most of your users were in your offices behind corporate security protections. But now, you've effectively gone from having maybe a handful of offices to effectively tens or hundreds or even thousands of offices, depending on how many staff you have. And that's just increased the attack landscape and footprint that the cyber criminals have to try to exploit. And these threats that are out there, they really are real. And here's some data points that perhaps illustrate the point. From organisations like the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK, and NISA in Europe, and from some of our own findings over the last several months. And let's just look at some of these data points very quickly. So in the not quite 12 months between September 19 and August 20, there were 2.3 million malicious emails reported to the NCSC by the UK public, with most of these being phishing attempts. And almost 170,000 phishing URLs were taken down in that period. And we'll talk about those two things more in a minute. And if you look at the European data from NISA, where you get a little bit more detail on the nature of the attacks, we can also see this use of phishing attacks masquerading as advice or information about the pandemic. And I don't know about you, our audience, but I'm something of an info junkie on the pandemic. And it's just so easy to click on something that looks interesting and in so doing to inadvertently fall into the trap. And doing this, it can have really massive financial consequences. In the case of, in NISA's data, 26.2 billion of losses through business email compromise attacks in 1 year alone, 2019. So it's really easy to see why the criminals invest so much time and ingenuity into this stuff. And at Nasstar, we've seen really large-scale compromise of Office 365 estates through some checks that we run, which I'll come back to. And yet, only 10% of all the cyber attacks are due to system weaknesses. The vast majority are down to us, human fallibility. It's just so easy to be duped. So, for anyone that's caught any of our previous webinars in this series, you'll know that we've looked at various aspects of cybersecurity and risk management. We've talked a lot about perimeter security, email system hardening, web filtering, 24/7 proactive monitoring, and technologies like SIEM, endpoint protection, intrusion prevention and detection. And all of these things, they play a really vital part in building a holistic, multi-layered cyber defense strategy. But today we're going to look at things through a slightly different lens, which starts from the premise that no matter how good your protections are and what the perimeter measures you might put in place, the criminals will still look for ways through and around. And remember, it's only 10% of attacks that exploit system weaknesses, and the rest of it is involving usually some kind of identity theft. So today we're going to talk about a couple of ways we can help you to make some inroads into the 90%. And the first thing we're going to look at is what the phishing attacks often look like. Well, often they look like this. So this looks pretty real, looks real to me. It's a kind of email I get very often. It comes from DocuSign. It's asking me to review some documents and click to sign them digitally. Well, it looks like it's from DocuSign, but actually it isn't. This is a real example. Clicking on that, I'd be taken to what looks like a DocuSign page, and I'd very probably be asked to surrender my details. And that's the way that these situations very often begin, with a surrendering of details. And once the criminals have got those details, very often the place they next go is your email system. An email system these days is very, very often Office 365 from Microsoft. So one of the things we do to try to help protect against attacks on 365 estates is to run some automated scripts around people's Office 365 estates to look for fairly low level and simple indications of compromise, things like forwarding rules that might have been set up, or impossible travel scenarios where people are in London at 1 o'clock and miraculously in New York at 2 o'clock, things like that. We've got code which will interrogate those logs. It can go back in time from a few hours to months and look for any instances. And you could do this yourself. It's simple. It's a pragmatic approach, but it really acknowledges that despite all the measures you take, the criminals will continue to knock at the door. And we've been doing precisely what I've described here for about 9 months now. We've run checks for more than 150 businesses, and we've found indications of compromise in around 70% of every single instance that we've checked. Now, some of these were, nothing to be overly worried about. We found examples of bad practice, people setting up forwarding to their private email addresses, which creates its own risk, things like that. So we're able to just point it out. But some of these checks have actually uncovered very material cyber breaches with massive ongoing data loss. So it kind of bears out the validity and the importance of running these kinds of checks at frequency as well. It's not the kind of thing you do once and then forget about. You need to be doing this on a recurrent basis. We recommend monthly cycles on that. And it's a really useful instrument in kind of identifying and preventing, what could be some really quite concerning activity. The second area, which we're going to talk a lot more about, and I'll hand over to Jeremy in a minute, is dark web monitoring. We provide a dark web monitoring service which leverages Skurio's technology, which has nothing to do with protecting your perimeter in the sense of putting barriers around you. In fact, it's based on the premise that one way or another, some of your data, including credentials, may well already have been compromised. So with our dark web monitoring service, we look outside your organization into the internet and the dark web for your credentials that might have already been stolen, might already be being actively traded and then used against you in some kind of attack. So it's a plank really in a broader digital risk protection suite of services that we offer in partnership with Skurio, and it's technology that we've got tightly integrated within our SOC and the incident and event management systems that we use. so that as soon as the technology spots your data out there, it alerts within our systems, and then our expert team begin immediately the process of investigation and mitigation. Jeremy's going to tell you a lot more about how that all works. So I'm going to hand over to you, Jeremy, now.
Thanks very much, Mark. And thanks for having me on board. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about how the dark web monitoring works. And, really a lot of the things that Mark had been saying that about how defending the perimeter is really not quite enough these days. And I think, we see some key trends that are driving that. So the first one is digital transformation. Remember, we were all doing this before COVID, but it just got accelerated several years into several months as a result of COVID and home working. But increasingly data is being stored and processed by hundreds or thousands of partners and systems and APIs and services to make all our businesses more digital, more accessible to our customers, available 24/7 on any device, which is great for the customer, but it means your data is being stored and processed by lots and lots of different players. Second big mega trend, of course, is transition to cloud, even through things like Office 365, but increasingly CRM systems, HR systems, lots of processing shifting from your premise, where you had to look after servers and turn them off and on again and find space for them, and air conditioning has now moved to the cloud, which is brilliant, but it means the security of that data is outside your direct control in a lot of cases. And then the third element that we see a lot of is this so-called shadow IT. So people signing up to third-party cloud services to do something for work, generally for the right reason, but it's not always the right thing to do. And they can sign up to a system that is cheap or free and helps them do a better job and deliver results to your customers sooner. However, the problem is that shadow IT it is the stuff that your IT security team doesn't know about. And so if they don't know about it, they can't control it and they can't manage it. And as we know, the problem with clouds is sometimes they leak, and it only takes one of those systems to be hacked or compromised, and all of your customer data could end up on the outside. So, even before COVID, defending the perimeter really wasn't quite enough in today's connected world. And since COVID, as Mark pointed out, your perimeter just expanded by a factor of 1,000 because most people in the white collar industries are working from home. That's going to continue, for the rest of this year, and certainly a lot of the people we talk to say that's going to be a bit of a structural change to them. And of course, the staff are using computers on an uncontrolled network at home where they've got other devices, IoT devices they bought to monitor their front doorbells and the baby alarms. That a lot of those are inherently insecure. So the bad guys can probably much more easily get onto a home network of your employee than onto your corporate networks. The day-to-day stuff, it's just much harder to check things with colleagues. I get phishing emails like Mark was showing again, almost every day. It takes a bit more effort for me to just talk to my finance director and say, "Hi Ben, did you really just send me that email, or are we really needing to approve this payment?" So just that day-to-day human interaction is harder when you're more separated. And fraud and business email compromise, a massive loss, as Mark had already highlighted. And unfortunately, I think some organizations are at risk from malicious insiders a little bit more. People are stressed economically through the situation at home, through being locked down. They're at home, they've got access to your data on your machines, and it is a bit easier for them to lose or misuse that data. So, traditional cybersecurity approaches really were focused on trying to keep data inside the network and stopping it getting out. What we're doing is complementary to that. You can think of it as an additional safety net that is really looking after your data no matter where it lives, both to give you advanced warning of threats to your organization and infrastructure, and also if the worst happens, real-time detection of a data leak, particularly one that's happened from somewhere else in your supply chain, from one of your partners, from one of those cloud services, where it's not your security that's failed, but it's still your data that's got out there. So if we kind of compare traditional cybersecurity approaches that are typically defending the perimeter, they tend to be looking after those endpoints, those servers, looking at the network traffic, looking for odd things happening, blocking all those malicious IPs and malware signatures, which is pretty much what the core IT security team has been doing for quite a few years now. With digital risk protection, what we're doing is extending that detection surface outside the perimeter to look for your data itself, rather than trying to worry about the machines and networks it's stored on. So there, with the digital risk protection system, we're not connecting to your network or your devices. We're looking for your data on the dark web, the deep web, the bad bits of the internet that Google doesn't reach. And so because of that, it's about looking for threats that are specific to your own organization. And we're going to show a few examples of that. And really, every business these days more or less is digital. And so, the responsibility for security needs to shift from that of the networks and the machines, which is the traditional IT security team, to security of the data itself, which is really the remit of the CISO. It's that security of the information. So if you think about, your own business, what you probably have is a set of systems over on the left-hand side of this slide, which are kind of pretty well known. They're your core systems that you know and control. They're your shared directories. There's your email system. They're your core databases that, you've probably got in-premise or moving to cloud. But as you get further away from that perimeter, you start to get into the realm of unknown systems. So these are systems where you don't even know they exist, those shadow IT systems, some of the systems your partners may be using to process your data, the websites your staff are logging into and shopping on at work on those devices. And part of the challenge from those unknown systems is they're going to introduce risk that could impact back on those core systems that you know. And with the move to cloud, you're no longer in direct control of the security of a lot of those platforms. We use Salesforce for our CRM system, and we're not in direct control of the security of Salesforce. They're obviously very big. They're very good at what they do. But if somebody were to find an exploit or a 0-day in that platform, there is a risk to our customer data being exfiltrated. So, there's systems you know about and there's systems you control. And so really you can think about systems either being fully managed by you, there's systems that you can audit the security of those systems, but those unknown and unmanaged ones are potentially, a much bigger risk. I mean, I talk a little bit about password reuse here, and I think someone said the other day, hackers don't break in anymore, they log in. I think it goes to Mark's point that only 10% of data breaches are down to, security weaknesses. 90% of them are really where the hacker is logging in rather than breaking in. So password reuse is very common. I've picked a fictitious James Bond character here, but if he's got his email address and his nice strong password, it's got mixed case and digits and special characters, and he's logging into your core sites with that. So one of the big things people do is they use that same password or a variant of it on some unrelated site that they're they're accessing it for work. It could be LinkedIn, it could be an industry specific site where they have to log in and register, and they'll have used probably the same password or a variant of it on some other site related to work. Not in itself a problem, but the challenge is you've got no control over that site. That's one of those sites, one of those thousands of sites where you've logged in and created a password is going to get hacked. And then often the hacker will grab the data, exfiltrate it, and then sell it on. So there'll be databases of hundreds of millions, thousands, any number, billions in some cases, of plain text, email addresses and password combinations. And so then a second bad actor can take that and use that in a couple of different ways. So one is increasing use of something called credential stuffing. So these are automated scripts that will go and try that same leaked email and password combination on many different systems. Generally, they're trying to get into things they can resell, which could be PayPal or Amazon or Spotify or loyalty card schemes, but they can also use them against your own infrastructure. The worst case, though, is if somebody is targeting your organization, it's very easy to go and find a list of email addresses and passwords that are used for a specific organization. And then I can start by hand trying different variants to go, okay, I wonder if it's DB9 instead of DB5, is it a question mark instead of an exclamation mark? So these attacks can be automated or they can be highly targeted. Another thing to think about is if that employee is using a similar password to log into a home email account, and the bad guy can get into that user's email account, well, then you can do things like trigger password reset requests. And that's where Office 365 compromises are so damaging, because as soon as you're into that email account, you can set up forwarding rules to hide your activity. You can reset passwords to get into all of those end systems, and do all sorts of damage. And although two-factor authentication is great, it's not foolproof. Smishing, so malicious texts that can be used to gain control of your phone. There's the SIM swap frauds where the bad guys will go and clone a SIM and register a new phone, and then they can use 2FA to get into those same systems as well. So two-factor authentication, of course, is great. You employ it wherever you can, but not all systems support it, and it isn't foolproof. It's possible to bypass it. So the basic things about password hygiene are really important to educate your employees about. So if we think about that, the systems that extend from your core IT systems, where you know and control them, all the way down to the shadow IT, and even this idea of bringing your own app. So, an employee joins a company and says, oh, there was this really cool service I used at my last place for marketing automation and sending emails to customers. It's free, I'll just set it up and use it. You've got this sort of pyramid of risk where at the top of it is known and managed, but the bottom of it is quite uncontrolled. But because of that supply chain issue, it's a bit worse than that. You've effectively got, a pyramid of pyramids. It's almost like a house of cards, and trying to keep track of third and fourth and fifth party risks is essentially impossible. So that's why what we're doing with the digital risk protection solutions is taking a different approach and saying, okay, let's just worry about the data rather than the networks. So that digital risk protection platform is doing really four things. One is it's detecting your data being posted or leaked or marketed or sold online. It's alerting you or your service partner in real time. It's helping them take action to understand what's gone on and then to analyze and address the cause of it. And because we're focused on the data, we can cover data that leaks out for any reasons. Obviously, there are malicious attacks, whether it's hackers or insiders. 90% of breaches happen through simple human error, people sending email to the wrong place, just reusing passwords, those simple things. We've talked about the fact that it's a data-centric approach, so it doesn't matter where that data is being stored or processed. It could be your network, your supply chain, or on the outside. And then we start to think about what kind of data can we be looking for? What kind of data would you not want to see leaked online? So that's what the digital risk protection platform is doing. It's focusing on the data itself. So we're going to talk about these different kinds of data, how we'd go about protecting them, and look at some examples of breaches. So the way the DRP platform works is a little bit like a search engine. So for each of those categories of data that you want to protect, you can come up with a set of search terms to represent those. So they could be as simple as your corporate email domain, or it could be a list of 1 million customer email addresses that have been hashed up. It could be your brand and product names. It could be the IP addresses of your servers. Lots of different use cases, lots of different search terms. We put those into the digital risk protection platform, which is continuously and automatically monitoring the surface, deep, and dark web, looking for any data that's matching your search terms and generating a real-time alert. And as Mark explained, with partners like Nasstar, that's feeding directly into the ticketing system, the 24/7 SOC, to raise an incident, get the team investigating it, and hopefully, even have remediated it by the time you get into the office on Monday morning. So that's fundamentally how the platform works. What we're now going to do is take a look at a few examples, starting with login credentials. So these can be typically your corporate email credentials, but also potentially those login details your customers and partners use to get into your systems. So this is all fictional data here. So any data you see in this presentation is all been reconstructed, but these are real case studies. These are real stories. We've just changed the data. So let's start here. This is a really typical example you can see on the screen of a dump of email credentials and plain text passwords on a bin site, a bin and paste site. There's lots of these around the internet that are anonymous ways of exchanging data. And so this particular post came in and it triggered an automated alert in our platform because it contained an email address from one of the customers. So in this example, it's a fictitious one again, greenelectrics.co.uk. but that's matched because it's a corporate email domain that was being monitored. And here we could see the employee email address and a plain text password, which was the name of his favorite football team, presumably. Really typical, happens all the time. People are using the same old password for multiple sites, particularly if it's not something they're particularly concerned about security of. So that's that post has happened online. Within a few minutes, it's been detected by our platform and it's raised an alert through to the SOC team. So now we need to say, right, what can we do now to reduce the probability of a compromise and any impact of that risk? So obviously the risk of that data being exposed could be through business email compromise. It could be through unauthorized access to networks or VPNs. It could be spear phishing attacks on markers. It could even be blackmail and extortion emails that will say, we've got your password, Liverpool, that we've captured from an adult site you've been visiting. Unless you pay this ransom or give us this data, and we're going to release it on social media. Some simple things you can do is firstly try and get that post taken down from the external site where it's been posted to minimize the amount of places that information is going to propagate to. And then, particularly if Marcus was in a privileged account situation, so working in IT or maybe in finance or HR, you could automatically trigger a password reset if that was an appropriate thing to do. We'd strongly recommend informing each of those end users to let them know that those credentials have been breached. Perhaps including a redacted copy of the passwords, and even giving them some resources to explain what to do. Suggest they don't use that password again. Go and reset it on any third-party sites they've used that on. And really, it's about education. So, educating that employee about the increased risks of phishing, the fact they should be using a different password on every site, encouraging them to use the password manager that's been provided to them. Another real life example, this is one of our customers. It was an investment fund in London. One of the main guys had his email address exposed, used the same email address and password on multiple sites. In this case, the names of his kids. Again, we've changed the data here, but that's pretty much what it looked like. One of those sites had got hacked, and what was interesting here is one of the hackers had got hold of that list and then tried all of the possible email addresses and passwords to get into Netflix, because he knows he can sell premium Netflix accounts online. And then what we've seen is he's sold this data to somebody else. He's delivered the results using one of these anonymous paste sites, and because he's not very clever, he's briefly made it publicly available without setting the privacy settings, and that's when we've grabbed the data and been able to issue an automated alert. So we've now seen the fact that Max's email address has been exposed, and again, you can start that remediation of go change it everywhere else. So thinking back to that, how do I manage the risks of those systems all the way through from the left-hand side where we manage them through to those those third-party sites like Spotify, where your employees have been using their work email because it's convenient for them, but that's introduced a risk. So I think the core security, a lot of us are spending a lot of time and effort and working with partners like Nasstar to manage those core systems. But once you get outside the known universe, you're really probably relying on the individual employees to do the right thing, just through employee habits, through training. Maybe they remember to use the corporate password manager. Maybe they're using the browser password manager, which is better than nothing, but it's harder for you to revoke those credentials. So there's a few things we can do here. Really simple one to do is to issue a corporate password manager, very cheap solution, make it available to all your staff. We use one that gives our staff free access to use it for their home accounts as well, because you just want to encourage that practice of a strong, unique password for every individual site. So if it gets breached, you've only lost access to that one site. And the second thing is encouraging people not to use work email. I mean, just this last weekend, we saw big breaches being posted online for online shopping sites for clothes shopping. So many people using their work email addresses to buy clothes online. They don't need to do that. It's presenting a risk to the network. Educate them on what's appropriate use of that corporate email address. So that's credentials, really easy win. Let's move on to the kind of core IT infrastructure. So your servers, your websites, your apps, your domains, because these are, again, things that are under attack a lot of the time. Here's a case study of hacktivists targeting infrastructure. And what we're seeing here on the right-hand side is reconnaissance that's being done by a hacktivist group. So these are groups like Anonymous, but there are others they're often targeting multiple organizations, which could be a bank or a country or an industry, or people who are involved in a particular industry, often motivated by ideology rather than money. And what they've done here is they've run a penetration test against a whole bunch of different companies. This particular example went on for many, many thousands of lines. They've basically done an exhaustive probe, a proper pen test of all of the subdomains they can find, all of the systems, and they're looking for vulnerabilities using scripts. And so here they've highlighted one that on the main web server hasn't got X-frame options, which means that whole site can be cloned and clickjacked. And so what the bad guys are doing is then running that penetration test and publishing a link to the site online, because they're trying to encourage hacking and DDoS attacks by their followers. So, in some cases they will even post it on Twitter, as per this example. And it's an operation, this particular example, against a hospital in Chile. And so they've now, they're putting hashtags on the operations. They've got some indication that this is because they don't like Chile for whatever reason. And so as a result of that post being made, that as that hospital, you're going to be getting DDoS attacks over the next couple of weeks. And so we see a lot of our customers getting targeted like this. What you can do with the DRP platform is in real time, as soon as that pen test is posted online, get an alert through, and so something is being planned. It's sometimes quite easy to go and find out when they're planning an attack, and so you can do things like increase the strength of your web application firewall. You can try and address any of those vulnerabilities or unpatched weaknesses that are being mentioned in the penetration test script. But if you don't know about it, the first time you're going to see it is when you're actively under attack. So a bit of early warning that can help you deal with it. Second thing we want to cover is typo squatting, increasingly common for phishing attacks and brand impersonation. Very, very easy, very cheap to go and register a domain that looks very similar to your own. So it could be trying to capitalize on people, missing out dots, putting spaces in, using misspellings, international characters. You can now register domain names using all sorts of characters that look a little bit like your regular ASCII. Even including blank spaces, almost impossible to spot, particularly on a mobile browser. And so, here's an example. Here's two URLs for Skurio. It's really hard to tell which one of those is the fake. It's actually the top one, that isn't actually a U. It's a mathematical symbol that happens to look like a U, but I can go and register that domain for a few pounds. And so, typo squatting can be used for lots of different threats. Probably the worst one is for phishing customer login. So if I imagine I've got an e-commerce site, which is my real website, I've got a customer login, of course. Now, if I'm the hacker, I can go and register a fake version of that domain. In this case, with an umlaut on, but often a lot more subtle than that. I can clone the website contents and I can put that same login form on. But what I'm doing is I'm capturing that plain text email address and password as the user types them in and hits send. I'm getting a copy of those. If I'm smart, what I'll do is I'll redirect that login to my genuine site. So the customer might see a failed login attempt and think, oh, it's a bit weird. Maybe I didn't type the password in right. The next time they try it, it works fine, and they don't even know. But now the hacker's got those credentials, he can use them to get into your site, but he can also, using his friendly script bot, go and target a whole bunch of other sites using that same email password combination. So, typo squatting is increasingly being used as a vector for phishing and fraud, both of your staff and of your customers. So detecting those domain registrations that are similar to your own is another kind of really interesting part of the service, because then you can investigate those sites and get them taken down. Okay, let's talk about personal data. This is the stuff that hits the headlines when people leak big sets of customer data. That's why you get the big fines under GDPR. And again, digital transformation, we're all storing and processing data about customers in lots of different systems. If you think about your own businesses, how do you go and acquire clients in the first place? Through your marketing funnel and your website. How do you communicate with those customers during the sales process to fulfill their order? Provide them ongoing customer support. Often these kind of functions can be outsourced to third-party call centers who have got access to your customer data. They can be leaky from a technical perspective, but also from a social engineering perspective. Staff in call centers are regularly approached in the car park by people threatening them to provide customer credit card details, which used to cost £50 a time and now cost £5 a time. So it's inevitable that somewhere in that chain there's a weak link that is at risk. And one of our customers, the CISO, when we were talking to them about this, said, "Yep, we store data in about 1,000 different systems." So if we look at that same example earlier with Marcus's email address in, we think about where did this data come from, how did it leak out, and how would you find out if the data in this post was also if all these people were your customers? How would you find out? Really hard thing to search for. So looking at that original post again, we fictionalized the data, but it's a real story. This original post had just over 2,000 email addresses in, about 500 different domains, so quite a lot of data in there. One of the things we spotted straight away was a couple of unusual passwords. We had two people in this little snippet on the screen that had used the same password, MaxPod Coffee. Again, a made up name, but it was a coffee related company. And so we think, okay, that's odd. We also see a lot of UK domains in here. So btinternet.co.uk looks like a British data set predominantly. So when we took a look at those 2,136 passwords, we just ran some frequency domain analysis on the plain text passwords, and as well as the football teams and the names of the children and the wives and the husbands, more than 10% of them were relating to coffee in general and MaxPod Coffee specifically, and that's not a coincidence. So, there's definitely a strong correlation there. And actually, just a quick bit of analyst research identified this company we've called MaxPod Coffee here, but it's a coffee pod system similar to Nespresso, not Nespresso, but a similar kind of variant of that kind of thing. And it turns out there's only one importer of it in the UK. They're at the top of the Google ad page, and it's actually very easy to identify the original source of the data leak. The domain of that company featured within the data set as well. And they had a very simple e-commerce site built using a very standard e-commerce framework a lot of small businesses would use. The other thing we noticed about the data in those 2,136 email addresses and passwords were there were some duplicates in it, which is interesting. Now, if that data had been exfiltrated from a database itself, you wouldn't expect to see duplicate entries in there because there'd only be one line for that. We also saw cases where there were typos in the domain names, or the same user on different email domains, or in some cases typos in the password. So again, that suggests this isn't coming from a login database on the web server itself, because those wouldn't be valid email addresses. They couldn't have been verified. And so this was a very strong suggestion that the site had been hit by some malware that was skimming off those credentials at the point of entry, and is a very common vulnerability called Magicart that's been around for a few years now. And in fact, it was a variant of this that was used as part of the British Airways breach a couple of years ago, for which they've just been fined a reduced amount, but still tens of millions of pounds, with class action suits. I think last I saw going up to 800 million pounds being talked about there. So the way this technique works, if you think of any modern website, what you've got is a web server with some HTML in it, but lots of JavaScript libraries, both JavaScript you've written yourself, but also lots of third-party JavaScript libraries. And lots of partner systems. You've probably got chat bots on there and help systems and lots of widgets on your website that have come from third parties. Each of those third parties uses third party or fourth party JavaScript libraries. So the way Magicart works, normally you've got this website form where I've got a form to fill in with my name and credit card details or login password or whatever it is. I've got a button that says login or pay now or check out. And when I press that button, there's a bit of JavaScript that is listening for that button to be pressed. It then takes all this data, serializes it up, encrypts it, and sends it over SSL to British Airways or whoever the site's owned by. The way Magicart works is by corrupting one of these libraries. In the case of BA, it was a library linked to a very boring page about baggage weight allowances that is linked to from every bit of their site. And there were 22 lines of JavaScript within that code, very well obfuscated. But what they also were doing were also listening to this button on this page. And whenever a user pressed it, as well as the data being sent to BA, it was also being sent over SSL to the hacker's server and being effectively skimmed off at the point of entry. So a couple of things were happening here that the hackers had gone and registered effectively a Typo squatted domain, a domain that if I was British Airways security staff and reviewing it, it could well be one of my own domains. I've got no idea. It certainly doesn't jump out at me necessarily. But the other thing that's happening is this traffic is being sent directly from the user's browser to the hacker's server. It is not going through the British Airways network. It doesn't matter how much AI they've got monitoring weird things on the network traffic here, because none of that traffic went through BA. It all went directly from my mobile phone or my home internet connection to the bad guy's server. So, defending the perimeter, you've obviously got to do it, but it doesn't catch every kind of weakness. So the challenge, if you're that coffee company or you're British Airways, how do you manage where you've got thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of data records? And so that's where you want to be looking at these posts with 2,000 email addresses in and saying, okay, are any of those my customer data? One or two of them might be, and that's a coincidence. But if 95% of the people in this post were also my customers, or if all of them were, then I definitely want to be looking at it. And so that's a kind of exhaustive approach to monitoring your entire customer data set using a fingerprint technique to look for small sets of it leaking, which again can be done using the digital risk protection technique. So customer data, how can you cut that risk? So definitely monitor for typo squatted domain names. They're often registered quite a long time before an attack is launched. If you see something suspicious, even if there's no immediate threat, you can monitor it for a change of the DNS records, attaching a mail server, some website content being put up. We've got some things called synthetic breach markers, which are synthetic identities you can put into those customer data sets to give you a unique indicator if that data is leaked or misused. Or you can go as far as fingerprinting that whole customer data set in an anonymous way and monitor it for leaks. And finally, we're just going to wrap up on the final couple of use cases, which are, leaks of business critical information. Depending on the business you're in, there's going to be, lots of different categories here, generally based around keywords. But again, it's back to what do you not want to see leaked online? So again, anonymized data, but real examples. Here's an example of a leaked email thread with a Canadian law firm and one of their clients. And it was posted on, again, an anonymous dump site. And it's an email thread between a couple of partners in the law firm and a client talking about a case that's in progress and some monies to be paid. There's personal information disclosed in it, potentially legal and privileged information. Might have been leaked by the client, might have been leaked from someone in the law firm, could have been deliberate, could have been accidental. It doesn't matter, it's out there in the public domain. So detecting that in real time helps you mitigate the damage of that. So one thing you can often do is get the post taken down really quickly to minimize the number of people that can see that information. You can then say, okay, this is an incident. I want to go and look at the network logs of the law firm to see, did any of their employees access this dump site, this paste site in the last few days or weeks? Did the leak come from inside that network? And, you can go as far. A lot of these sites, they're not intentionally bad. They're just used by bad people. So if you make a legal request to find out the IP address that that posted this online, in some cases it is possible to get that information and pursue the case. Another completely different type of business critical information can be counterfeit goods or products being offered on dark web marketplaces. So this is an example for a pharmaceutical product. We've already started to see COVID vaccines popping up, probably fake. But you can imagine these can be fake goods, could have a big impact on your reputation, because who knows what's inside these things, particularly if it's something like pharmaceutical. But it could also be a leak through your supply chain or an insider. Why is somebody selling your stuff cheap or giving it away? Is it insider fraud? Is it somebody in your supply chain that isn't complying with the rules? So very broad category of information. You can again sort of, in some cases, ask for that post or vendor to be taken down, go and investigate the leak, and take legal action if necessary. So conscious of time, just wrapping up. So, all those kinds of data can be protected by the DRP platform. Because we're looking after the data, we're covering it wherever it's being stored and processed. We're protecting you as a bit of a safety net against both those malicious attacks, but also the accidental disclosures that are 90% of breaches. And really, it's about that real-time nature to, alert your partner. So, partnering with Nasstar, where they've got a 24/7 operation center that can, as soon as that post has come in, they can investigate it and take action and get it fixed for you. So to wrap up, digital transformation definitely driven a sort of step change in your business risk, where defending the perimeter is not really enough anymore. So the automated DRP is going to help you reduce that risk by detecting threats and leaks in real time. Definitely starting with the basics of Office 365, really important. So much of the fraud and loss happens through that really simple business email compromise, as Mark was talking about. And the Nasstar, 24/7 SOC is really, an ideal companion with our technology to help you deal with those things as quickly as possible, so that you're minimizing your impact on your revenue loss, your internal resource, and that all important reputation and customer trust. That was it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Inspiring and scary all at one time, but a lot of hope in there as well, I think. So no, but on a serious note, incredibly powerful technology, which we're seeing tremendous results with. We've been able to pick up lots of the types of examples that Jeremy's just been sharing with us there, which as he said, are real. They're anonymized, but those are real case studies that we've just been through, and I think it's really eye-opening, sobering, and as I say, inspiring to have the ability to take the bad guys on and increase your protections. In fact, I saw an example of another devious use of the COVID pandemic just yesterday, where I watched a video of a phishing attack where the attacker had sent. I shudder to think how many people may have been duped by this. There's an email which looks completely credible from the NHS with a link to a website advising you that you're in the next cohort or vaccine, inviting you to accept inclusion within the appointment booking, and then taking to a site which looks exactly as you would expect an NHS site to, where you're asked to surrender just about every personal credential and piece of information you could possibly imagine. And it's very concerning to think how many people can be caught out by that, and how callous really the people out there are that would exploit that kind of situation. But we've seen earlier in the presentation the kind of financial rewards, as well as some of the the other motivations that some of these people might have, as Jerry's been talking about. So we're going to wrap up there, and I hope it's been a useful session for everybody, and we appreciate you joining us. I'll just leave you with two final points. We've talked about how you spot some of these things that could be happening if you are attacked. At Nasstar, we've got an award-winning incident response team, and we're available 24/7, 365 to help, using technology like Skurios and lots of others to really help you recover from those situations and manage reporting with the ICO and those kinds of things. The other thing I mentioned earlier on, the Office 365 health checks. Well, if anybody's interested in taking advantage of that AI technology that we've developed, we are offering those complimentary at the moment. So if you would like us to check your 365 estate, just to make sure there's nothing untoward going on or find out if there is, then please reach out. Contact details are on the slide. We'd be delighted to hear from you, and we'd be delighted to help. We appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks from both of us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next session in the near future. Thanks.